Hello, we're live. Hi, everyone.
Hey, hey.
Hi, hi.
Hey, I like that. Uh, and hello, everyone who's attending this webinar. Thank you for being here. We were told there's a lot of you apparently out there right now, so um, say hi as well. So I wanted to start today's webinar by saying we're going to talk about Google Mom and what it means for search. It's been around for a little while, although we expect it to start impacting more and more what we see in search. And to discuss that, I have two great, if I may say so, SEO experts with me today. I have Crystal Carter, who's the head of SEO communications at Wix. Hi, Crystal.
Hello.
And I also have Mike King, who's the founder and CEO at iPull Rank.
Greetings and salutations.
And we are going to discuss as much as we can what MUM means, what it means for search, what it means for SEO, what it means for people doing content, what it means for you, whether you're a user or you have a business, and online is one of your main channels of getting your business out there. And why we do that? Because MUM has the potential to drastically change what we see in the SERPs, right? How actually this whole experience translates going into the future. Apparently, it's already started slightly, but it's going to impact more and more what we see. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I think I want to start with Crystal. Both our guests have prepared some pretty cool slides, and they have a lot to talk to you about. So I'm going to pass to Crystal to talk to us about MUM.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here with both of you. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I am the head of SEO communications at Wix, and today I'm going to be talking about Google Mom in a sort of top level, sort of introductory, just get your head around it sort of way. Without giving too much away, Mike's going to get into a lot of the details. So if you're looking for more and more details, Mike will get to that when we get there. So I'm just going to start off with just a sort of warm up around sort of some of the core concepts that are really important for SEOs and other users to understand when we're thinking about Google Mom in a wider context. So if I am able to share my slides, fantastic. Okay, thank you. So making sense of Google's Mom. So Google Mom is an algorithm. And what is a Google algorithm update? This is what they do when they update algorithms. So they're adding a new algorithm to the mix. So when they update their algorithms, sometimes we refer to it as a core algorithm update. Sometimes it can be something that's a little bit smaller. But every time they make a change, what they're doing is they're essentially refining how they are understanding and conveying information to the world. So when they update their algorithm, they are changing the criteria or directive that they use to order information on the web and to help their users best find what they need. And to do this, they have to adjust periodically which information that they deem to be most important. And sometimes this can have a big effect on which results we see on the web. Now, when we think about this, it's important to think about how search works. And if you look at Google, they explain that their mission is to organize the information to make it most universally acceptable and useful. And they say it starts with search. But what you'll notice is they haven't said anything about websites. And I haven't said anything about websites, and that's because they don't either. And that's because their goal is to organize information in the best way possible. So when they're doing their algorithm updates, they are doing this to make sure that the information that they're supplying is of the best quality. And sometimes this can be information that comes from websites. A lot of times it comes from websites, but sometimes, like for instance, if you go on to search on your mobile, you'll see a lot of the information will come from apps, or you'll see that sometimes it'll just be a video, straight to a video, or it might be that they've got it showing in Google Maps. This is what they need to do to make sure that the information that they're giving to people is accurate and is useful and is most helpful. So you'll see that over the history of their algorithm updates, it used to be that there were sort of few core updates happening over time. But you can see that as we get further along, as we start seeing more machine learning, getting involved. And as we see more algorithms being added to the mix, the updates become more thick and fast. So in 2018, for instance, there were over 3,000 updates happening. And I think that as we see Google Mum rolled out, that we're likely to see more of that. And one of the reasons why is because things are becoming a lot more complex. So Google has to make these updates in order to keep up with how users are using the web, how we're accessing information, the kind of information that we expect to see, and how that impacts search. So if we think about way back in the day when we had sort of 10 plain blue links, people would think about, what information was available. But now Google has to account for where the person is searching, when they're searching, what time of day they're searching, how they're searching, if they're on a mobile or if they're on a screen-free device, hey Alexa, hey Google, or who's searching. So they have lots and lots of information about who is doing the search, and they use all of this to direct their algorithms. So, for instance, if you look at a search for kids clothes in 2017 versus a search for kids clothes in 2022, there's a lot more information that talks about where, or that gives information about where the person is searching from, gives reviews on the quality of it, takes into account when the search is being made, and is giving lots of different information. So Google is trying to make sure that when they're supplying information, that they're moving ever closer to making the information highly accessible from the best possible sources and the most useful. When we look at their algorithm updates, we can see that they tend to be split into similar categories. So the mobile first, the page experience, the page speed insight, intrusive interstitials, and a lot of their core updates will think about accessibility. And I mean accessibility with a small a. So just about people actually being able to get onto a website. And then from the best sources was when we think about things like the spam updates or product reviews updates, site diversity updates. Those are making sure that we've got good quality information. And the most useful things like passage ranking, BERT, things that are very, very much associated with EAT. So what does that have to do with Mum, right? What am I on about? Well, Mum is the latest in Google's suite of super powerful algorithms. So it runs alongside BERT, but it's much more powerful than BERT. And again, Mike is going to get into all the details around that. But MUM stands for Multitask Unified Model. And not only does it process natural language, but it does so in many, many, many languages. And it's continuing to add them as we go along. It also processes text and images with a similar sort of quality, and is moving closer to being able to do the same with other types of media as well. And that's because this is Google calls this a new milestone in their understanding of information. This is also part of the sort of natural shift in focus that comes as part of the sort of mobile first digital experience, which allows users to engage in content dynamically, both through inputs and outputs. So, users are logging into Google and they're adding reviews directly into Google. Users are adding photos directly into Google. Users are getting photos from Google. This is a very two-way conversation, and Google Mum and Google's algorithms are trying to keep up with that. So this is what they're trying to push towards this, and they're trying to make sure that we are understanding, or that they're able to understand the information with good and fresh eyes. So let's consider, when we think about what Mum looks like, let's have a look at Mum's spaghetti squash. So if we think about how information is ordered on Google in this sort of multimodal space, we're looking at information that we're getting a lot of different inputs from. So not only are we finding, the information about what the spaghetti squash is, what it looks like, different recipes, things like that, we're also starting to get more of a breakdown with trying to understand the intent around it. So a spaghetti squash is a very sort of, that's a two-word query, so it's very light. But you can get into, but they're giving us more information there. So they're trying to understand intent. They're trying to understand lots of different ways that we're thinking about this information. So not only this spaghetti squash, but what's a substitute for a spaghetti squash? You could substitute it for zucchini. They also want to think about different ways that you might understand it using different media, and video in particular seems to be something that they're quite heavy on. So on this particular one, you can see information for videos here. You can see information for videos here, and you can also see further information when you're getting into those details. And this is because Google wants to make sure that you've got the most information possible for the query that you need, and that it's not just from text, it's not just from videos, but it's from a mix of information. So what can we expect from them in the short term? I think that we're probably going to see a lot more algorithm updates over time. But the good thing about that is that there's less corrective time because they'll just correct it straight away. The other good thing, the other thing we're likely to see in the short term is more images and more better understanding for image heavy verticals. If you're a photography site, if you're a video site or things like that, this will be good for you. Another thing is it's great for user experience because it's a much richer experience. In the long term, I think that there could potentially be some volatility around different verticals like the health verticals, because I know that Google has actively talked about getting into health verticals using some of their image optimization understanding. There could also be some reduction in the prominence of English content because they're getting so much more invested into international content. And we could also see more device-driven updates from things like Google Lens, which has been a big part of the mum conversation. There's lots of other things that I think we might see, but I want to make sure that we've got time to get to Mike's fantastic slides. So that's a wrap from me.
Amazing. Crystal, thank you so much. You didn't have to rush. We have enough time.
Okay. Sorry.
Well, me hosting this for the first time means that I forgot to say to everyone and encourage everyone to ask your questions in the chat. We are going to get to them after our discussion here, and we're going to aim to answer as many of them as possible.
I would also like to give a special shout out to Rich, who noticed my mom's spaghetti joke, which I spent a lot of time investing in.
Wonderful joke.
I mean, you only get one shot to make a joke like that.
Nice.
Thank you.
So yes, please send us your questions, ask your questions, and as we go along, we're going to take them into account in our discussion and then cover them as well at the end. So Crystal, that was great. That was incredible in terms of giving us a great context around not just how Google works, but how Mum brings some new angles into this, and how you ended your presentation just reminded me how Google almost a year ago now, I think, announced Mum, saying, I think we've lost Mike. We're gonna carry on. He's gonna join us.
That's right.
Announcing that, first of all, it cannot just understand language, but generate it. Second, that it works across languages, which has the potential to change a lot in how people in different locations and using even different languages can consume content that was not accessible to them previously.
Yeah.
How do you see that affecting?
I think that can be really good for making marketers who are maybe working in a region that's smaller or has a smaller population, connect with bigger audiences. I think it also and I think it's also going to make like English, like, so I think the internet is, there's a lot of English preference in the internet. Yeah. But I think that I think English content creators are going to have to step up their game, because I think that certainly even as I see on Twitter, for instance, I follow a few people who speak languages that I do not, but they're a translation the translations that they have on Twitter are actually really, really good, and there's so much AI translation that's going on right now that I think that's just going to continue at a pace. So I think that if you're making content and you're just relying on your English content, I think that now's the time to make sure that you've got language covered, like multiple languages covered across your core content categories.
That's interesting, because I've been thinking, well, not being a native English speaker myself, so usually I tend to search. I'm in the UK, so see the results here, and just because of what we do, I just check the same thing in Greek SERPs just to see. It's a much smaller market, so sometimes it's great to see the differences. And regarding the languages, I was thinking, could it also mean the opposite. Like, there's a lot of companies that stretch their resources and budgets too thin sometimes, trying to create a lot of local content and localize pretty much the same thing sometimes for different markets. Could it have the opposite effect? Like, focus on a language, do a great job there, and gradually mom will catch up.
I think that's a potential. I think also Google when they're talking, when they gave the example, and I think you mentioned this in your slides, Mike, about Mount Fuji, and they talk about having some local information there that a local person will be able to provide a particular amount of local information. And so I think that they'll probably bring that into their algorithm when they're thinking about like EAT, for instance, so expertise. So obviously somebody who is from the place will have more expert knowledge than someone who is not from a place. If they're talking about, like, say, I don't know, where to go for dinner in New York. Like, if you live in New York, you will know better than me Googling from the UK about, whether or not there's a good pizza place. So I think that it should balance out between the expertise points, the local pack points, and things like things like overall expertise and content quality. So I think it can be a bit of a mix.
But so it can be an opportunity actually for, let's say, the small guys, right, or the local guys who previously maybe could not even compete, right?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about something really niche, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mike, what do you think?
I think I couldn't find my mute button. Yeah, I think that, for the most part, a lot of this stuff is going to come from, the same sites that you're seeing rank quite well for broad terms, right? Like, I think Google thinks of sites like Wikipedia, WebMD, and so on as like inherently authoritative. And so when they want to answer a quick question, they're very much going to leverage those. But like Crystal is saying, when it becomes a more niche topic or subject where, those sites can't answer those questions in that way, they are going to start to drill down there. However, I think that what we're talking about with Mum is that, they're putting multiple pieces of information together to give you a response. Like in the example that they gave you, they're talking about, okay, I want to climb Mount Fuji after I've climbed another mountain. They're pulling a variety of pieces of information from different sources and then generating a new piece of text based on that. So it's not necessarily just about like, how do I myself make myself rank better so I'm the answer? These series of algorithms are generating answers. So it's not just about like, how do I be there? It's like, how do I be a part of it? And so it may not necessarily be that like your brand is like, this brand says, here's the answer. No, Google is taking a series of facts that it's finding and then saying, here's the answer. So you may not have the opportunity to truly have that visibility through this type of algorithm update.
Thank you. And that also kind of to me it rings an alarm when thinking about passage ranking as well, and sort of how Google can now bring that into it, because it does sound like it. You're right, Mike, that it's no longer about here's 10 or even 5 in a featured snippet or whatever it might be. Click on something if you want to find out more. It's more about serving that intent and need on those pages and answer it without having to work too hard for it, essentially, right?
Exactly. And I think what the opportunity is like you being that complete answer so that Mum doesn't have to do such a hard job of it, right? Because that's the whole point. Like, they don't want to give you 10 options. They want to give you the answer. And they don't want to just answer. They don't want to just give you the answer. They want to give you your answer to your specific question. And historically, that's when Google is done, is giving you the answer. And then you have to go through several times to determine what is the answer so you can compute your answer. And so they're trying to get there for you and give you that domain expertise and answer to your queries.
Yeah.
Right. So an example of the spaghetti squash, they like the spaghetti squash can be hard to find in a supermarket. So you notice that the first thing on there was a substitute for spaghetti squash, because if you're googling this, you probably don't know what it is. That's why you've googled it, and you probably need a replacement. And what's the replacement? It's a zucchini, and they've just pulled that information from that. And it behaves very similarly to featured snippets, and featured snippets and the instancers behave very similarly. So they pull the text from it, sometimes from the middle of the page, sometimes from different parts of the page, and so they're using a very similar technique when they're doing this, to make sure that they're answering, they're predicting your answer, and they're giving it to you in that way.
Yeah, which is mind blowing. I was having a discussion with Morty Oberstein a while back about it, because it's like, even as a human being, it is hard to understand what someone may need, even if you know them, if they ask in a very general way. Like, are they having a bad day? Are they ashamed to ask for some? Do they not even know what they want? They have a vague idea. So to think that we're now at a stage that we're discussing a search engine kind of catering for so many, not just obvious intents, but implied intents that vary based on your personal search history, location, all of that is mind blowing. And across 75 languages. I will never stop saying that. So I know we could discuss forever, but I want to make sure Mike also gets a chance to go over his slides. So I'll stop us here. Please keep posting your questions. We see them. We have them in our queue to answer as well and cover. And Mike, please just talk to us about your slide.
Cool. So Crystal talked me up. Now I have to actually be good. I'm gonna give it a shot. So I'm sharing my screen. If we could bring that up, that'd be perfect. So I just want to give you a brief technical overview on how Mum works. And my apologies for the background noise. I share an office with Google, so you're hearing from Google right now, meaning my wife. So first, I'm Mike King. I'm from an agency called iPullRank. We are based here in New York City, and we do everything related to SEO, content strategy, and machine learning. I also make music, and you can download my music right here. Also, I have a new video that I put out. You can check that out as well if you want more entertainment from me when I'm not right in front of you. Okay, so how does Mum work? Well, I really feel like Google is trying to build the Star Trek computer. And back when Amit Singhal ran Google Search, he was like the SVP of Google Search for a number of years. He was saying that. He was like, I want to build the Star Trek computer, where you just have that ambient computer around you where you can ask questions at any point. And so what you're seeing with Mum, and when they introduced it, they talked about this idea of being able to answer very complex questions. And again, we talked a little bit about that Mount Fuji question and how it requires someone with domain expertise to ultimately answer that for you. But the thing is, Google has dramatically improved its ability to both understand and generate language over the last few years. And so there's what's called transformer technology, which is one of the underlying components of how BERT works. The T in BERT stands for transformers. And transformer technology is also behind a lot of the leading language models out there. If you've heard of GPT-3, it is based on this concept. And effectively, the way it works is they train it on a big data set of pages from across the web, of course. And what they do is they'll extract different words, and then they build these models to predict what the next word would be. And so based on that, they can then write copy in a way that you and I can't tell the difference of whether or not a person wrote it versus whether a computer wrote it. And so they're able to leverage this information, or this capability, in building algorithms moving forward. So their understanding of language is just far beyond what it's been, as long as I've done SEO, basically. And so the multitask unified model is something that they say is 1,000 times better than BERT, and it's built on one of their other language models, which is called T5, or it's a text-to-text transformation transformer. I think it's what it's called, and it's the most ridiculous name ever. But nevertheless, it really allows them to understand the copy a bit better, understand your queries a bit better, and also generate answers from a variety of different data points that it can pull across its index. And so if you read this one paper that they have, it's called Rethinking Search, Making Domain Experts Out of Dilettantes. They talk a lot about what the goals are for just search in general, and also what they're doing here with Mum. And so what they talk about is this idea of that, search engines historically just give you facts. They just help you get to a series of answers as fast as possible, but they don't necessarily always fulfill a specific need. If you ask a question that's too complicated to Google historically, it's just going to give you a list of, related stuff, but it's not necessarily going to answer your question. And so ultimately, what they're trying to do is, again, just pull pieces of the web together, synthesize it, and then generate an answer from new text based on the information that they've pulled. So technically, what does Mum do? Well, it's multimodal, which means you can use a variety of different ways of asking your question, whether that's using images, videos, audio, or just standard queries. And it also allows for more complex queries because of their ability to just better understand what you're asking for. And again, we're talking about this idea that it's able to connect in 75 different languages. So it's able to translate stuff that otherwise isn't in the given language or the searcher's language, and then still give them an answer despite the fact that that information is in another language. So a couple things here. Multimodal search is actually not new, and multimodal search isn't just, how do I explicitly search, whether that's with a video, whether it was that's me like just, humming a song and seeing if Google can figure it out. It's also taking into context your context. So where are you physically? Or did you have a series of searches leading up to this search? What can I learn from that to then inform how I answer this search? So as an example, if I'm saying, how far is the Empire State Building? Well, for me, like I can see it from my window and it's like 5 miles away or whatever. Whereas anyone else on this call, it's going to be across the Atlantic Ocean and it's going to be, a much farther place. So I can say, where's the Empire State Building into Google Home? And then I can also ask as a subsequent query, how long will it take me to get there? And so implicitly, Google is able to know, like physically, I am in downtown Brooklyn, that's in Midtown. These are 2 points. I can now, answer the question as to how far it is based on the information that's implicitly there. And also the pronoun is already understood from my previous search. So these are all ideas of multimodal search. And in fact, if you've ever done an image search where you've put a query in, you're also doing multimodal search. It's not just, these new ideas that we're talking about. It's something that's been a part of how Google works for a long time. And so typically, if you perform a search that's similar to that, where you have the query in there, the word query, and you also have the image, both of those things are broken down into their atomic components and then used to determine, what is it that we should be considering in our set of pages that we want to review. And so as you're seeing on this screen, imagine I'm searching for this room scene. It's then broken down into a chair, another chair, a table, a potted plant. So then those are all part of the query, because part of what Mum does is it converts anything that you're searching, no matter how you search it, into text. And also it uses the text to then improve or further contextualize those rankings as well, but also taking that user context into account. And so this is what that would look like. The multimodal query can come from any type. Again, that personal context, which can be the implicit query, the actual keyword that they've given, an image that they've uploaded, and those are all run through different scoring functions or algorithms. And then whatever the outcomes are from that, they're then, reviewed together and then sifted down to what ultimately should be the series of results that you want. But with Mum, they're trying to get to one result. And so again, they may take features from all of these different things that they're pulling out and then writing an actual response for you. So Google has actually modeled users for forever, basically. Not forever, for a long time, where they've collected your search queries and they, again, collected the information about where you're searching from and use all that information to build that user context to inform personalization. So it's not just, this being something new, it's also a function of there being, just a long history of Google having a lot of data on you that they leverage for these things as well. And so this is what that looks like. They're collecting everything in their query logs, and there's a lot of information that goes with those query logs, including the location, including what did you end up clicking on, and all those things inform what they're going to show you in the future. So multi-model is also not new. So when we talk about they're talking about, they take your query, they're running it through a variety of different models at the same time, depending on what you've given them. And then again, there is ultimately an output. And so some very interesting things that they highlight here. One, the inspiration for multi-model, and multi-model was something that they talked about, they rolled out in 2017. So again, this isn't like brand new stuff. But what they say is that it's informed, or it's inspired by how the human brain works. So no matter how or which of your senses you pull in information about or through, you're reconciling that information into one thing, whether that's words or thoughts or however you think. If you're someone that doesn't have an internal monologue, you just see pictures, cool, whatever it is, they're saying, like, we pull everything in and then we turn it into words, and then there's an output that is a series of words as well. And again, this is how T5 itself works. Like, before we even think about if you use T5, it has a series of different operations that it can do. It can do translation. It can score a sentence for grammar. It can also, come up with text summarization. And this one model encapsulates a series of models. You throw in text, it gives you text back. So another really interesting thing that they identify with the multi-model concept is that when you start to mix models together, they're not even sure why, but it ultimately gives you better responses. And so I think what they're doing with is they're just kind of like playing around with that to get the right combination of models to use in order to generate the right response. So the patent, this one is out there. I recommend you just take a look if you're more interested in how things work. But the bottom line is, what it talks about is it uses image recognition, speak recognition, translation, image capturing, and then also parsing in general to get to the bottom of whatever someone is trying to answer with their query. And so another thing to know about how Google understands queries is they break them down into entities. So entities have been something that we've talked about in SEO for a long time. But here's a good example that they've shared in the past, where the query is, who was the U.S. president when the Angels won the World Series? And so that's a series of different entities that they break that down into, and then they can use that information associated with those entities to better answer those questions. So as you can see here, this is broken down to a list of presidents, a country, baseball team, World Series winners by year. And so they can start to bring those features in and then narrow that down to the answer, which is George W. Bush. Also has a great understanding of entities. And so again, this is that example that they gave us about Mount Adams versus Mount Fuji. And so what's highlighted in blue are the specific entities. And so there's a lot of implicit queries that are being asked as part of this explicit question. And some of those involve what is fitness training required for the terrain, what hiking gear is required for fall weather, based on when the person said that they want to do that. And so effectively, it's asking all those questions in the background and then pulling all that information together and stitching together an answer to that query. And so here's an example of, here's a series of facts that it may be pulling together, again, to then answer that question more comprehensively. So what's really interesting is that Google has continued, of course, because they innovate every day, but they have something else coming out called Mural, or they've announced it at the end of last year, which kind of does this at more depth for imagery. And so if you ask a question related to a series of images, they're able to look at an image, even though if it's not in English, or not in the language that you asked it in, and say, okay, well, we know this means the same thing, even though it's in Japanese, or even though it's in Spanish or Greek or whatever. And so they're able to still extract information from that to answer your question, which isn't something that I'm aware they were able to do in the past. So what I believe is that we're seeing the building blocks of that Star Trek computer. And over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, I'm expecting things like Google Home, Google Assistant to be far more intuitive, far more reactive in ways that they're not saying, hey, I can't answer that question. They're just able to derive far more information from your implicit and explicit context. And again, Google wants to answer your question instead of just the question. And yeah, we're in the future. Wrapping up, I'm Mike King. I'm not the real estate agent for that house. We also have something called the SEO Weekly that my guy Garrett does. He's out on paternity leave, but he'll be back soon. I encourage you to tune in. And yeah, you know how to find me on the internet.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. That was incredible. Thank you so much. Right. I've made so many notes and we have so many questions that I want to start basically with something that we were discussing slightly before, but I see is also a question that we have in the chat, so it can get things started. So my question initially was, are SEOs ready for mom? Let's start at a simple place.
I'll jump in. I think if you've been making good content, as they always say, for a while, then you should be fairly ready for mom. If you have been making good content that also has a very rich sense of multimedia, then you will be more ready for mom. So again, it is pulling from lots of different sources. So Google's putting so much video onto the SERP at the moment. That's one way. The Google Images, there's not only the sort of Google Images regular thing, but there's also the topic layer within Google Images. If you're spending some time investing in semantic search, which is a really interesting and fast developing section of SEO, then you'll be more prepared for Google Mom. And I think also if you're a smaller business and you maybe don't have all the resources to be running machine learning models all the time and that sort of thing, then you can use some other tools. So for instance, if you're using things like Google's Google Business Profile, not Google My Business, Google Business Profiles, for instance, that they will encourage you to add to be on Google Maps, to have images, to have video, to have lots of different information, to be able to answer questions within a Google Business Profile. And they have lots of other ways that there's lots of other Google products that you can engage in that encourage you and sort of guide you through some of those sort of making content in a sort of multimodal way.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, what do you think? Is the SEO community ready for it?
Is the SEO community ever ready for anything? I think, the one thing to know is that they are training on all this stuff on the web as it stands. So that's an indication that, it's going to work irrespective of whatever we do. But I think Crystal's earlier points about how do we use more structured data, how do we just continue to, make content that's more specific, is how you can account for this. But I don't think it's the type of thing where it's like, hey, here's a punch list of things of how you optimize for mom. I don't think that's necessarily realistic. It's really about how do we have the content that meets the specific context of the users that we're trying to reach. And so it may require that you have more robust content, or you have different pieces of content that cover the same thing that are more relative to a given audience, because we're going to find is this kind of acts like a more of a filter bubble to some degree, in that Google is going to want, again, to answer specific people's question rather than just giving the broad answer. So more specific content is what you should be thinking about, so you can account for this.
Mm-hmm. So it ties into that. We've got a few questions I think that are relevant to this. So one question was, what could developers do? This is also a big thing when working in SEO, right? You have to really align with developers and make sure everything is great there. But I guess there's the wider context for this is also a question we received about what exactly, in practical terms, what could we do to rank or to improve our rank in SERP?
So I would say that you should be talking to your developers about how you handle media. That's what I would say. I've said that I've written this and I wrote an article about some of these trends at the beginning of the year. And I would say that you should be making sure that you have, a good CDN, and that you have, good media. I mean, um, for instance, at my team at Wix, if you upload an image onto Wix, it's already connected to Google's Cloud Vision API and gives you information on the tags. Like it generates tags and tells you like what they are. So if case in point, I have a personal site that's a Wix site. If I upload a picture of me, then it says like curly hair, for instance. Like it says, oh, that's what it goes. It goes, that's a lady with curly hair, and I go, yes, that's true. This is what happens. So for instance, our CRM is built with that in mind, and I think more important people are going to be thinking about that. There are APIs that you can connect to that will allow you to do that. So for instance, Cloud Vision API allows you to connect with that. They have other different APIs that will allow you to connect to some of their more advanced systems directly. So that's something that if you have like a big budget, you can look at when you're thinking about and when you're thinking about the media that you have on your website, making sure that it's highly accessible and that people are able to access it clearly is really good. If you're thinking about content for, say, like things like webinars like this, I highly encourage people to make sure that it's successful in many ways. So these days, if you go onto a news article, for instance, they'll often have an audio snippet of it as well. They'll have the audio of it, they'll have the text of it, they'll have a picture of it, they'll have all of the different ways for people to access it. And this is good not only for algorithms and for how the bots might read it, but it's also good for different users who have different requirements. Like maybe I don't have time to look at a screen, or maybe I've been looking at a screen all day and I just want to listen to somebody read me this article. I think that making sure that your team is able to support lots of different kinds of ways that users might access your site is really, really important. And of course, make sure that it's mobile friendly, and as mobile friendly as possible, because a lot of this is being led by the sort of mobile interactions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that exactly what Crystal is saying is exactly right. And it also comes back down to markup. And, like she's saying, describe your pictures better, surface your media content more. Also, wrap that in transcripts, and again, marking those things up, giving good structured markup. And I don't just mean like schema. I mean like, write header tags and put your tables in actual tables rather than divs. Things like that are really valuable. Just make your content easier to extract for Google.
Mm-hmm. So that also, because we started talking about, okay, let's give the people who are watching us now some practical advice on how to improve their performance, or what does it mean for what they have to do. But one of the things I think we're facing in SEO anyway, for a while, and I expect it to become even more, is how do you report on success, right? A while back, it was like, you would have clients, I'm guessing Mike as well, I'm assuming, but and Crystal as well, come in and said, I want to rank number 1 for these terms, or the terms you tell me. There would be like tracking of those positions. Work would be measured on, okay, we've created content for these keywords with that search volume. Do you see that changing? Should people in SEO change their approach on how they, not just how they do work, but how they report on success because of MUM?
I think people need to so anybody who's working in SEO who doesn't understand how to read their data properly needs to stop and learn how to read their data properly, because you, like, there is no, people say, oh, I want to rank on page 1 of Google. I'm like, what page? Which page? Where is this page? There are many, 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 many pages. Okay. So like I will see a different page than you will see, than my sister will see, than my husband will see. There are many, many different pages. And so I've had it before where I've had clients and I don't know, it was like I use this example a lot. It was a marquee client, like party, tents for parties and stuff. And everybody, there's only so many keywords for that. There's like, and everybody's got the same one. And I was like, well, okay, let's see how we go. I looked up this keyword. It was like, what size marquee for 100 people, right? And I looked up, and everybody had the same picture. They had this beauty shot of a marquee with flowers and like ready for a wedding and da 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 da. And I was like, that's not the kind of information I want. What I want to know is how many people if I want a round table, how many people if I want a banquet table, how many people if we got a dance floor, how many people if we don't have anything in there, how many people if there's a bar, blah blah blah. So I got on Canva, made all these ugly diagrams on Canva, and I stuck them all on the thing. And do you know what? We started ranking on images first. We started ranking on the image search first, and then we started ranking on Google on the other part. When you're looking in something like, oh, there's a fun tool I've heard of called SEMrush. When you're looking in SEMrush, you can see whether you're ranking on certain packs. You can see whether you're working on local pack. You can see whether you're working on image pack. You can see whether you're ranking for videos. You can see where you're ranking for all these different things. That is your friend. If you have a section, if you have a piece of content that is ranking somewhere for in the regular part, but maybe isn't ranking for video, that's where you should be going. If you're not ranking for video, that's where you should be going. Like have a look at that. And if the SERP is full of videos and images at the front part and you don't have any on there, then like you need to get involved. Like you just have to. So I would say that it's a question of making sure that you're tracking that part of it. So if the front of the SERP is all images, like I think I was looking up one for like hedgehogs the other day. Don't ask me why. But if you look up a hedgehog, the whole front of the viewport on mobile is pictures of hedgehogs. Well, ranking number 1 for hedgehog is no good because you're actually on page 2. So the data needs to reflect the SERP. So if the query is around images, then your data should be around images for that particular one. If the query it has lots of text, like let's say we're looking up, I don't know, tax law, international tax law. I don't think there's that many pictures for that. Then you should make sure that you're looking for text and understand the data for that. But if you have a multimodal search, then you're going to have to look at that. The other thing I would also say is look at the actual SERP. Don't just rely on tools, but look at the actual SERP because it's always changing. I'm sorry, Mike, I'll let you speak in just a second, but Google gave an example at one of their recent ones. I think it was Search On about what is a lion, right? And they said, oh, we'll think about the search, what is a lion? And we want to understand the intent that you don't want to know whether the lion's going to be a pet or whether the lion's going to be this, that, or the other. And I was watching this and it's like, oh, let me Google what is a lion. And I Google what is a lion. Do you know there's now a 3D lion there? There's a 3D there's a 3D like AR lion, and me and my kid were playing with this lion or whatever. Okay, so that is what that SERP looks like. So if you previously had the SERP for lion, there's now a whole distraction of an AR lion there.
And that's what I was thinking while you were saying this, Crystal, is like historically or traditionally in SEO, you look at the SERPs, you look at tools like SEMrush to get ideas and then say, right, this is what Google rewards. This is indicative of the intent and what I need to create. And I'm going to try and do a bit better. And hopefully I'll be then on top. But what we see, and probably, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Mike, as well, with Mom, we've already seen a lot more volatility in the past year in the SERPs, right? Morty did also a great analysis of that. But we probably should no longer reply on like, okay, here's a SERP. It looks like it wants just a blog post, for example. I'll just create a blog post, because we expect that to also change as this is deployed across more and more searches and industries, right?
Well, yes and no. And it kind of overlaps with the previous question, because how are we going to measure this? And what I mean by that is, a lot of this is going to be direct answers. And it's like, you don't necessarily know, were you featured in that direct answer? And, Google, same with like voice search, like Google doesn't give us analytics on voice search. So to that end, and until we're able to get something that's more robust in understanding like what the impacts are, it's really hard to say, right? But I do agree that ultimately you do need to take a look at the SERP and what is ranking and use that to inform what content type you should be targeting. Because in some cases, maybe the user actually wants a video, and so just do that and then repurpose what is said in that video so you're covering all your bases. So I think a lot of this is going to yield more repurposing content and thinking of ways that you can maximize content in a variety of different formats so you're hitting all the buckets around the multimodal search.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to talk a bit about now specifically some industries we've seen being impacted a lot from even core updates or other updates being in the spotlight of what Google is working on. And we have a question about for you, Crystal, initially, but I want both your opinions. How do you see this impacting health or medical industry, MUM impacting them? Specifically the blogs. I think the question is about the blog and the content there, but I'm guessing it's interesting as a wider topic, like would MUM impact these industries more?
So yes, but I'm not sure that it's exactly the same as the wider one. So I mentioned it in my deck, and the reason why I mentioned it was because at Google I/O last year, Google also announced that they were going to be rolling out like a big medical dermatological project that was going to be relying on a lot of the same tooling as MUM. So there a lot of image search and a lot of like multimodal like sort of information and that sort of thing. And also having worked with a lot of medical clients, I am very aware that Google is very much gatekeeping that content. So there are some keywords that you cannot advertise for. There are some keywords where if you are a commercial medical business, you can't rank. They basically they only let like the Mayo Clinic and WebMD and like the CDC, they only let them rank. And like in the UK, it's like the NHS, and they will not let like Dr. so and so rank if they don't know who they are. Like it's not worth putting your money in that pot. Like you can do it in a different way. You can go for like long tail like stuff like that. But I would say that MUM is the thing that will change with it is I think that because MUM is so much more powerful than BERT, has so much better understanding of entities. I think that it will allow Google to do better jurisprudence, or I don't know what due diligence, I guess we should say, around EAT. So Mike talked about entities. And things like knowledge graphs, like so knowledge graphs are steadily increasing. They're putting more and more knowledge graphs with things. So for instance, if you are an expert in your field, Google is more likely to be able to identify you as an expert in your field when you're writing about whatever content is related to your medical practice. So if you're Dr. Fauci or something, it's going to be a lot easier for them to understand that you're Dr. Fauci and you actually do know what you're talking about. But let's not get into the politics of that. But people they'll be able to understand that. And I think that Google MUM will allow them to do that more quickly. So it's worth investing time in making sure that if you are working in a medical space, that you have that your team, the people in your team, and your medical business as a whole has a clear and robust sort of EAT profile. So I'm thinking that you've got like, if you're working in a medical space, you may very well be written up in scholarly journals. So you should probably be on Google Scholar. There's probably you're probably working with like charity groups, things like that. Make sure that you're very clear there. Make sure you've got clear bios. Make sure all of your LinkedIn stuff is up to scratch. Any of your certificates, all that sort of things. Make sure that all of that stuff is very clearly represented and very clearly accessible to Google in a lot of different ways. So using schema markup for like profile pages, using schema markup for adding any certificate images like and logos and verifications and things like that. Because I think it will make it easier for Google to verify that you are who you say you are and you know what you're talking about and that that it's worth referring to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I think in that space, it's very easy for them to just cut everyone else out, like you're saying. Because there's so much information that is like vetted and peer reviewed and maybe buried in some of these documents. But I think when we talk about translation, it isn't just like, how do I translate from this language to this language? They may also be able to be like, how do I make this accessible to other people that aren't experts? And so to that end, seeing with Google doing all the stuff where they were like writing their own featured snippets and so on for health related topics, I could see them just squeezing everyone else out that isn't the CDC or NHS or Dr. Fauci.
But this is very interesting, actually, for two reasons. So we also have a question around, it ties a bit into search intent and how that can differ from one language to another. So it's not just about translating content. There's a huge angle to that, which is about actually is intent even similar in some cultures and contexts. But for example,
yeah, I was just thinking, like, if I Googled how do I fix a boot in England,
nice,
it would be the end of your car, like the back of your car. If you were like, how do I fix a boot in America? Obviously talking about, your Timberlands or whatever. And then or how do I fix a trunk? It's completely different as well.
Or what time should I turn up?
This is true.
And even in the health industry, right? Sometimes I'm also in the UK and I see results from WebMD, for example, or from US websites, and I don't get an answer whether kind of like that medication, for example, is supplied by the NHS. So I'm wondering, why am I seeing US results when I'm in the UK? So it can also kind of involve some complications.
I think they're testing a lot of stuff. There was recently an example about cars from Australia, about yellow cars from Australia that somebody shared on Twitter as well, that someone was looking for yellow cars and they were like, why are you showing me things from Australia? And Google's like, my bad, we'll fix that. Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Lol.
But we're already, because Google has kind of set the expectations. They will be letting us know as they go along and how mum is affecting SERPs. But for example, a couple of days ago, they said that they're starting to use it. They're going to roll it out in the next few weeks, I think, how to use mum to provide better results when you're in a situation, that it involves kind of like a crisis or a risk to your life, like, substance abuse, or they had a few examples, like, domestic violence, for example, right? And because I saw that and I was very curious, I was kind of like starting to Google what I see now, right? So if and that is part of mom trying to guess that intent. So if I search for domestic abuse, I get the helpline, and then I get like what it is, the kind of usual informational content and what to do about it. But if I search, I have to apologize publicly to my husband. I'm afraid of my husband. I just see other women posting in forums about their kind of stories, right? So, Mike, what do you see the importance of placing much more effort on our side as content creators, SEOs, in covering intent and understanding that intent ourselves versus like, oh, is there a keyword with a search volume that I can see for this?
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think much needs to change. Like, if you've been doing it right, you shouldn't really have a problem. And so I think in this case, where we're talking about like crises and things like that, one, you got to think hard, like, is this a place where your brand should be? Because what Google is saying is perhaps these brands shouldn't be here. It shouldn't be some, 750 word blog post written by some random copywriter on a subject that they don't know anything about, that they just like Googled and rewrote some stuff. Like, that shouldn't be the case. It should be an actual authoritative, trustworthy site whose information is appearing there. And so I think this level of filtering that mom brings is actually fantastic, because there's a lot of times where I've been in a situation, like medical situation, and I'm reading through something and I'm like, yeah, some SEO copywriter wrote this, don't trust this one, keep going. And so I think this approach that they're taking is ultimately going to make the experience in the world a better place, because we are so reliant on Google.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
I think that there's, if you really want to see it, like there's quite a lot of screenshots and stuff, like from during like the peak COVID times, I guess you would say. That's kind of been a trial run for all of this. So in the UK there was a lot of, like, if you look up again, I'm getting into spicy territory, but if you look up like COVID vaccinations, you don't get like, people discussing COVID vaccinations. You get vaccination centers and they're by the NHS, and it's like all of that sort of information, and they were gatekeeping that. There was a point at which where like they weren't doing advertisements for masks, and they would only put like, this is what a mask is, like, in like information where they're sort of driving people to that. And I think some of those are being led by partnerships. So direct partnerships within the SERP, and that's not necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily a direct response to MUM, but I think that I mean, the COVID one, I think, is an example of pulling through lots of information. But I think that it is an example of Google being more confident in creating the content themselves. Which is sort of what Mike's been talking about. Like they're happy to like be like, we have the answers, like we will supply you the answers pulling from different places across the web.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So on one hand, I'm kind of devastated because we have a lot of interesting questions, and we're running out of time to cover them. But if it's okay with you, Mike and Crystal, I want to encourage people to ask those questions and reach out to us on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we're more than happy to answer those questions as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's just keep a list of them. Maybe I'll just do like a blog post. Maybe Crystal and I can do a blog post.
We can do a blog post. We'll do a collab. It'll be a whole thing.
Let's do that, because there are some amazing questions here that it would be great to get answers for. But if I ask you, each of you, to wrap up this conversation, I think what would be useful would be to so if it was you tomorrow and you're running SEO for a business, pretty much close to the situation you're in, but what would be the first thing you take care of as of tomorrow to be prepared for this, if you haven't already?
Or you should count. We did one. No, you.
Crystal.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Thank you, Erica. I would. I've said it many times, but I would do a media audit of anything that we are ranking for, that currently doesn't have a decent multimedia on it. Not everything has to be a video. And it can be tricky if you've got things that like if you've got a fairly dry subject, like something like, I don't know, like I said, tax law or something like that. But there are tools. Canva is it is free to use, and you can make yourself like infographics, for instance, that are really useful. And I've done this with clients who had a really boring topic, bless them. And we doubled their image visibility using this. So I would say anything where you don't have multimedia, get involved with multimedia. And if you can add another layer of multimedia to that, I would do that as well. Obviously, keep it classy. Like, don't bombard people with a million pop-ups and like things everywhere. But make sure that you are satisfying the media requirements that are being reflected on the SERP for your queries.
So you would do kind of like a media content audit to see if you satisfy that intent with what you have already. Perfect.
With what you have that's already ranking.
Okay. Mike, what would you do tomorrow?
I would align my keywords with the target audiences and then see how their needs are different, because different personas searching for the same keyword may need different things. And then see how well our content aligns with that. So again, another content audit, but more aligned with the keyword versus the audience. And then fill in the blanks around what those questions they might be, and try to answer those in more comprehensive ways, again through different types of content, through imagery, through videos, and so on, so that we can basically check the boxes across the different modes for how users might search, so that we have more opportunity to potentially rank in the way that Google is thinking now.
Great. So I know we've run over a bit. Thank you all for your patience, and thank you for your time. It was great talking with you today. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Please reach out to us on social, and we hope to take the conversation there from here. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Later.